February 12th dawned cold over Guadalcanal. The morning light spread across Henderson Field like spilled gold. 24 dark blue fighters waited in perfect rows. Their metal skin reflected the early sun. Each aircraft sat silent on the coral runway. Major William Giese stood beside his watch. The hands pointed to 6 in the morning. Tension filled the humid air. Steam rose from coffee cups in trembling hands. Mechanics made final checks on engines that would soon roar to life. These Vought F4U Corsairs would taste combat within hours. Not practice flights over friendly territory. Not training missions with simulated targets. Real war waited beyond the horizon. Enemy fighters with veteran pilots would challenge them. Death would ride the morning thermals. The mission briefing had been simple. Escort duty to Vella La Vella, 230 miles into Japanese-controlled sky. The enemy owned that airspace. They patrolled it with confidence. They killed intruders without mercy. What the American pilots could not know was destiny approaching. This single squadron would trigger massive air battles. The Japanese had ruled these skies since Pearl Harbor. Their Mitsubishi A6M0 fighters had earned fearsome reputations, untouchable demons that struck from cloud cover, masters of aerial combat who showed no mercy. That mastery would shatter today. Pacific War experience had taught bitter lessons. Air superiority meant everything. Control the sky and armies could advance. Lose the air war, and defeat followed like shadows. Japanese pilots had proven their superiority repeatedly. Training that began in childhood. Tactics refined through countless battles. Technology that outperformed American designs. The Zero could turn tighter than any Allied fighter. It climbed faster through thin air. Its range exceeded anything America produced. Most importantly, veteran pilots flew these machines. Men bloodied over China's burning cities. Warriors who had swept British fighters from Singapore's sky. Pilots who had dominated every aerial battlefield since December 7th. The Imperial Japanese Navy's elite squadrons, based at Rabaul, represented the finest concentration of air power in the Pacific theater. 700 aircraft filled the runways. Pilots logged hundreds of combat hours against inferior opposition. Veterans who had crushed British resistance at Singapore. Men who had destroyed Dutch fighters over the East Indies. The same pilots who had achieved complete surprise at Pearl Harbor. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai's name was whispered with respect. Over 60 enemy aircraft had fallen to his guns. Warrant Officer Hiroyoshi Nishizawa would eventually claim over 80 kills before death claimed him. These were not mere pilots operating flying machines. They were artists whose canvas stretched across the Solomon Islands sky. Their brushes were machine guns and cannon. Their paint was aviation fuel mixed with blood. The Tainan Air Group represented elite Japanese naval aviation. The 251st Air Group had earned legendary status. The 204th Air Group contained hand-picked veterans. These units housed Japan's most skilled pilots, men who had trained for years before war began. Warriors who understood their aircraft as extensions of their own souls. Lieutenant Junichi Sasai commanded the Tainan Air Group with tactical brilliance. His pilots flew in loose formations that maximized individual skill while maintaining mutual support. They had perfected the art of turning combat, using the Zero's exceptional maneuverability to slide onto enemy tails, staying locked behind opponents until killing shots were certain. Their tactics exploited every advantage while minimizing weaknesses. The F4U Corsair crouched on Henderson Field's dusty coral surface. Its inverted gull wings created an unmistakable profile. a silhouette that would soon haunt Japanese nightmares. Metal and machinery waiting to become death incarnate. Under the cowling sat a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine. 2,000 horsepower of raw mechanical fury. More power than any fighter engine previously built. The massive Hamilton Standard propeller measured 13 feet 4 inches across. Its size required the distinctive bent wing design for adequate ground clearance. 6 Browning M250 caliber machine guns waited in the wings, each weapon capable of firing 750 rounds per minute. Total ammunition load reached 2,350 rounds. 400 rounds fed each inner gun. 375 rounds supplied the outer pairs. This firepower could saw a zero in half with a 2-second burst. Armor-piercing incendiary rounds would shred lightweight Japanese construction. But raw specifications told only part of the story. The Corsair had initially been rejected for carrier duty. Its long nose blocked forward visibility during landing approaches. The left wing stalled before the right wing. This characteristic caused vicious snap rolls at low airspeeds. The tailwheel arrangement created bouncing tendencies on carrier decks. Aircraft would launch back into the air at the worst possible moments. Navy officials declared it an ensign eliminator. Too dangerous for inexperienced pilots to operate safely. These same characteristics that made it dangerous to fly would make it lethal in combat. The power that made it difficult to control provided unmatched acceleration. Climb rates that no enemy fighter could match. Robust construction that added weight also absorbed punishment. Damage that would destroy lighter fighters would barely scratch Corsair armor plating. Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh of VMF 124 had logged only 25 hours in Corsairs before arriving at Guadalcanal. His background differed from typical naval aviation officers. A former enlisted man who had earned wings through determination rather than Annapolis connections. Brooklyn-born and Jersey City raised, he understood machinery intimately. Marine Corps service began in 1933 at age 17. Years as an aircraft mechanic provided deep knowledge of what made engines run, what caused mechanical failures under stress. The Corsair was not merely an airplane to Walsh. It represented 14,000 pounds of controlled violence. Master its temperament and death became your servant. Fail to understand its moods, and it would kill you as quickly as any enemy. VMF 124's pilots represented American society's cross-section. Farm boys from Iowa who had never seen oceans before Marine Corps service. College graduates who abandoned comfortable futures for gold wings. Former mechanics and store clerks who discovered natural aptitudes for flying. Youth united them all. Most pilots barely reached their early 20s. Combat experience was minimal among squadron members. Training at Camp Kearney in San Diego had been intensive but incomplete. No training could replicate the reality of combat against veterans who had been killing Americans since Pearl Harbor. Across the Solomon Sea at Rabaul, Japanese forces prepared for another day of operations. The sprawling base complex included 5 separate airfields. Vunakanau provided the primary fighter base. Lakanai handled bomber operations. Rapopo served as a backup facility. Tobera and Karavat supported transport operations. Simpson Harbor offered anchorage for combined fleet cruisers and destroyers. The town itself housed thousands of support personnel. Mechanics who kept aircraft flying. Armorers who loaded guns and bombs. Communications specialists who coordinated operations. Medical staff who treated wounded airmen. Rabaul had become the Gibraltar of the South Pacific, seemingly impregnable behind rings of fighters and anti-aircraft guns. Concrete bunkers protected vital installations. Underground facilities housed command centers and supply depots. Lieutenant Takeshi Maeda of the 204th Air Group studied morning reconnaissance reports. American strength at Guadalcanal was estimated at 40 to 50 fighters. Mixed types included mostly obsolete P-40 Warhawks, stubby F-4F Wildcats that had proven no match for Zeros. Nothing the veteran Japanese pilots could not handle with ease. The 204th Air Group had recently arrived at Rabaul. They replaced losses from the Tainan Air Group. Many pilots were China campaign veterans, men who had honed their skills against Chinese and Soviet pilots. They viewed Americans as inferior opponents, lacking the spiritual discipline and dedication of true warriors. Morning reconnaissance photographs showed something unusual. 24 aircraft with distinctive bent wings, larger than Wildcats, longer than P-40s. Naval intelligence had no designation for these mysterious fighters. Probably another failed American design rushed into service. The Americans constantly tried to compensate for inferior pilot skills. Heavier armament and armor were their typical solutions. It had not worked with the Buffalo fighter. It had not worked with the P-39 Airacobra. Why should this new aircraft prove any different than previous American failures? VMF-124's first combat mission launched at 8 in the morning. February 12th would be remembered as a turning point. 12 Corsairs lifted off from Henderson Field's Coral Runway. Their mission was escort duty for a PBY Catalina rescue operation. The flying boat would retrieve 2 downed pilots at Sandfly Bay, Vela La Vela. Mission profile appeared straightforward. Provide top cover while the vulnerable seaplane completed its work. No enemy contact was expected, according to intelligence reports. A milk run to blood the new squadron. Get them used to flying combat formations over enemy territory. The Corsairs climbed steadily toward 18,000 feet altitude. Their engines ran smoothly in the cool morning air. Below them, the Catalina lumbered along at 2,000 feet. Vulnerable and slow, it needed fighter protection. Major Giza led the formation with constant vigilance. Sky scanning never ceased. The Japanese had developed a reputation for appearing from nowhere, usually attacking from out of the sun, where detection was most difficult. Giza had drilled his pilots relentlessly during training. Maintain tight formation. Watch your wingman's tail at all times. Never attempt turning fights with Zero fighters. Use the Corsair's advantages instead: speed, firepower, and ability to absorb battle damage. Hit-and-run tactics were the key to survival. Dive attacks, followed by climbing escapes. Never get into turning fights with Zeros at low altitude, where their maneuverability advantage dominated. 20 minutes into the flight, Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh spotted movement below. 9 Zero fighters climbed from the southeast. They were positioning for an attack on the lumbering Catalina. The enemy had probably taken off from Bougainville or Balel, forward airstrips the Japanese used to extend fighter coverage. Walsh's voice crackled over the radio frequency. Bandits at 8 o'clock, low. Climbing toward our position. The moment of truth had finally arrived. 12 American rookies in an untested fighter design, against 9 Japanese veterans in the Pacific's most successful aircraft. Walsh rolled his Corsair inverted and pulled through into a split S maneuver, diving from 18,000 feet toward the climbing enemy formation. The Corsair accelerated like nothing he had ever experienced. The airspeed indicator swept past 350 miles per hour. 400. 425. Control surfaces stiffened under increasing air pressure, but the aircraft remained responsive to pilot inputs. At this speed, the Zeros could not follow. Even attempting to do so would be suicide. Their wings would fail under aerodynamic stress. torn off by forces their designers never anticipated. Walsh lined up on the trailing enemy fighter. He waited until the wingspan filled his gun sight completely. Distance closed to point-blank range. He squeezed the trigger and held it down. 6 streams of armor-piercing incendiary rounds converged at 900 feet. The API ammunition proved devastating against the Zero's unprotected fuel tanks. The Japanese fighter did not catch fire or explode dramatically. It simply disintegrated in midair like a toy smashed by an invisible hammer. Wings separated cleanly from the fuselage. The engine tore free from its mounting points. Control surfaces scattered like leaves in a hurricane. The pilot never had an opportunity to bail out. Death came too suddenly for human reflexes. Walsh pulled up hard from his diving attack. G-forces crushed him deep into his seat padding. He chandelled back toward altitude and safety. One pass had produced 1 confirmed kill. The other Corsairs followed Walsh's example perfectly, diving through the Japanese formation at maximum speed, using superior velocity to slash through enemy ranks. The engagement lasted exactly 4 minutes by Walsh's watch. When the surviving Zeros fled northward, 3 of their number were falling toward the sea in scattered pieces. No Corsairs had been lost in the encounter. Not one American fighter had even been hit by enemy fire. The tactical equation had shifted dramatically in those 4 minutes. The hunters had become the hunted in one brief engagement. The remaining Japanese fighters retreated at maximum speed. They belonged to the 582nd Air Group that had recently arrived at Rabaul. They had witnessed something that challenged everything they believed about aerial combat. Speed had conquered maneuverability. Firepower had overcome pilot skill. American industrial might had produced a fighter that could dominate Japanese aviation. That evening at Rabaul, the debriefing session was unusually somber. Surviving pilots reported encountering a completely new American fighter type. Their detailed report made disturbing reading for intelligence officers. Encountered new American fighter type over Vela La Vela area. Superior speed and dive characteristics beyond anything previously seen. Exceptional firepower concentrated in wings. Cannot engage in traditional turning combat due to speed differential. Armor protection negates effectiveness of 7.7 mm machine gun armament. Request immediate intelligence on aircraft identification and complete performance parameters. The report represented the first official acknowledgement that something fundamental had changed. The air war over the Solomon Islands would never be the same. Within 1 week, Japanese pilots had given the new American fighter an unofficial designation. Whistling Death became the name that struck fear into enemy hearts. The designation came from the distinctive sound Corsairs made during high-speed dives. A banshee wail created by air rushing through oil cooler intakes. Air flowed through wing root openings at tremendous velocity. The sound was unmistakable and terrifying. It became a war cry that announced execution from above. Ground troops on Japanese-held islands learned to fear that whistle. When they heard that particular sound, death would arrive within seconds. No time to take cover or return fire. The impact on Japanese air operations was immediate and profound. Bomber missions to Guadalcanal had previously required escort by only 12 fighters. Now, 20 or 30 escorts were considered minimum protection. Even with increased fighter coverage, losses remained heavy and consistent. The Corsairs' speed advantage meant American pilots could choose when and how to engage. Japanese pilots found themselves constantly on the defensive, trying to protect vulnerable bombers while being systematically picked apart, slashing attacks they could not counter or escape. By March 1943, all 8 Marine fighter squadrons in the Solomons were converting to Corsairs. VMF-121 received their first bent-wing birds. VMF-122 transitioned from Wildcats. VMF-123 traded their P-40s for Corsairs. VMF-124 continued perfecting their techniques. VMF-201 would soon become the famous Black Sheep. VMF-215 began their transition process. VMF-221 and VMF-223 completed squadron conversions. Each squadron received its full complement of bent-wing fighters. The transition period was not without significant costs. 7 aircraft were lost to operational accidents during the first month alone. Victims of the Corsair's unforgiving flight characteristics and demanding pilot technique. Landing accidents occurred with disturbing frequency. The long nose blocked forward visibility during final approach phases. Pilots could not see the runway until the last possible moment. They had to fly curving approaches, straightening out only at touchdown. Get the approach angle wrong and consequences were immediate. The powerful torque from the huge propeller would flip aircraft inverted. Skilled pilots learned to compensate with rudder inputs. Those who did not master the technique died in twisted wreckage. But pilots who conquered the bent wingbird found themselves possessing a weapon that could dominate any opponent. The Corsair changed fundamental assumptions about air combat in the Pacific theater. Previous tactics became obsolete overnight. The tactical revolution was both immediate and decisive in its effects. American pilots abandoned turning dogfights that had favored agile Zero fighters. Instead, they employed boom and zoom tactics exclusively. Diving attacks from superior altitude followed by climbing escapes. Fire-precise bursts, then climb away before enemies could respond. The Corsair could dive at speeds that would literally tear Zero wings from their fuselages. It could absorb battle damage that would destroy lighter Japanese construction. Most importantly, it could catch and kill any Japanese aircraft from a position of advantage. Speed had become more valuable than maneuverability. Firepower trumped pilot skill in many encounters. The Japanese attempted to adapt their tactics to counter Corsair advantages. New techniques were developed at training bases throughout Japan. Coordinated attacks from multiple angles to overwhelm individual Corsairs. Attempts to force American fighters into low-speed turning engagements. Targeting specific vulnerable spots on Corsair airframes. Oil cooler intakes in the wing roots. Cockpit canopy rails where armor plating was thinnest. Engine oil lines that were not protected by steel plating. But each Japanese adaptation was quickly countered by American tactical improvements. When Japanese pilots learned to attack from directly astern to avoid forward-firing guns, Corsair pilots adopted the thatch-weave defensive maneuver. When Zeros tried to exploit their superior climb rate at low speeds, Corsairs simply refused to engage below 250 miles per hour indicated airspeed. Speed became the key to survival and victory. April 1, 1943, saw Lieutenant Walsh leading 4 Corsairs on a fighter sweep over the Russell Islands. The morning sky was crystal clear. Scattered clouds at 10,000 feet provided perfect concealment for surprise attacks. 30 Zero fighters rose to intercept the small American formation, climbing from Munda Airfield in tight formations. In previous encounters, such overwhelming odds would have meant certain death for American pilots. No fighter pilot could survive 6-to-1 odds, but Walsh had spent weeks studying Corsair capabilities in detail. He had developed completely new tactical approaches. Instead of engaging in a general melee where numbers mattered, the Corsairs maintained strict altitude advantage. They made coordinated diving attacks from 20,000 feet. Each pilot covered the others during climbing recovery phases. The battle developed into a purely vertical fight. Corsairs diving and climbing, while Zeros struggled to follow. Enemy fighters trying to match Corsair climb rates found themselves hanging motionless on their propellers, struggling to maintain minimum airspeed for control. At those moments, they became sitting targets for the next Corsair in the attack rotation. Walsh personally destroyed 3 Zero fighters in 7 minutes of combat. Each kill followed an identical pattern. Dive from altitude, fire a precise burst, climb back to safety, reposition for the next attack. His wingman, Lieutenant Archie Donahue, shot down 2 additional enemy fighters. The 4 Corsairs claimed 11 confirmed victories without suffering any losses. When they landed back at Henderson Field, ground crews counted only 6 bullet holes among all 4 aircraft combined. 7.7mm machine guns could not penetrate Corsair armor plating. Their 20mm cannons were deadly against lighter Allied aircraft, but they required sustained hits to seriously damage the robust American fighter design. Getting those hits meant surviving long enough to aim accurately. Against Corsair speed and concentrated firepower, survival was becoming increasingly unlikely for Japanese pilots. Armor plating behind pilot seats was thick enough to stop 20mm cannon rounds. Windscreens used bulletproof glass that could deflect anything short of direct hits. Self-sealing fuel tanks could absorb dozens of bullet holes without catching fire or leaking. Multiple control systems provided redundancy if primary cables were severed. The aircraft could return home with damage that would have destroyed earlier fighter types. Japanese response to Corsair dominance revealed growing desperation throughout their command structure. Intelligence reports from Coastwatcher networks indicated experienced pilots were being withdrawn from Rabaul. They were sent back to Japan for training replacement pilots, but training programs required months to produce minimally qualified pilots. Losses were mounting faster than replacements could be produced and deployed. The Imperial Japanese Navy's carefully cultivated cadre of expert pilots was being systematically destroyed. Men with years of training and hundreds of combat hours were being shot down daily. Their replacements had basic flight training but no combat experience. The skill differential was becoming insurmountable as veteran American pilots gained experience. May 13, 1943, marked a significant milestone in Pacific air warfare. Kenneth Walsh achieved what no American pilot had accomplished before. He became the first Corsair ace with 5 confirmed aerial victories. The 5th kill came during a massive melee over the Russell Islands. Walsh found himself completely alone against 3 experienced Zero pilots. Instead of attempting to escape, the sensible tactical option, he chose to attack. Using superior Corsair speed, he made 3 separate high-speed passes. He shot down 1 Zero fighter on each diving attack. The sequence took less than 5 minutes to complete. The final Japanese pilot was clearly a veteran given his aggressive maneuvering and tactical awareness. He attempted to force Walsh into a turning fight at 5,000 feet altitude, where Zero maneuverability advantages would dominate the engagement. Walsh responded by pulling straight up into a vertical climb. The Corsair climbed until the pursuing Zero stalled and fell away helplessly. Walsh then rolled inverted and dove straight down. He caught the enemy fighter as it tried to recover from its stall. A sustained burst from all 650 caliber guns tore the Japanese aircraft completely in half. The fuselage separated just behind the cockpit. Both sections tumbled toward the sea, trailing smoke and debris. 2 weeks after becoming an ace, Walsh's victory total stood at 10 confirmed kills. The transformation was absolutely remarkable to witness. In just 3 months, a pilot with minimal experience in a rejected Navy fighter had become one of America's leading aces. The machine had made the man into a killer. The man had mastered the machine's deadly potential. But Walsh was certainly not alone in his success. Dozens of Marine pilots were discovering Corsair capabilities. Names that would become legendary were being written across Solomon Islands' skies. Lieutenant Robert Hansen of VMF 215 would eventually score 25 victories in just 6 months of combat, making him the highest-scoring Corsair ace of the entire war. His technique was elegantly simple, but devastatingly effective. Get above enemy formations using superior climb rate. Dive at maximum speed towards selected targets. Fire at close range where misses were impossible. Climb away before surviving enemies knew what had hit them. On January 14, 1944, he shot down 5 Japanese fighters in a single mission, methodically picking them off one by one as they tried desperately to protect a bomber formation. The psychological shock for Japanese pilots exceeded even tactical success. Individual aces were impressive, but squadron effectiveness was truly devastating. The Corsair's exceptional range exceeded 1,000 miles with external fuel tanks. This meant it could escort bomber formations all the way to Rabaul and back home. Previously, Japanese fighters had only to wait until American escorts reached maximum range. Then they would turn back, leaving bombers unprotected and vulnerable. Zeros would then systematically destroy unescorted bomber formations. What had been routine interception missions became deadly gauntlets. Corsairs stayed with bombers throughout entire missions, protecting them from takeoff to landing. June 16, 1943 demonstrated the complete reversal of air superiority. Over 100 Japanese aircraft launched from Rabaul to attack American shipping at Guadalcanal. They were intercepted by 32 Corsairs from 4 Marine squadrons. The battle that followed proved the fundamental shift in Pacific air power. The Japanese formation included the latest Zero variants. Model 32 Zeros with reduced wingspan for improved roll rates. Model 22 Zeros with enhanced armament packages. Advanced technology and superior numbers made no difference whatsoever. 77 Japanese aircraft were destroyed for the loss of only 6 Corsairs. A devastating 13-to-1 kill ratio that would be repeated consistently. Lieutenant Commander Takeo Tanamizu survived the encounter as one of few Japanese pilots to return. A veteran with over 30 confirmed victories, his report was sobering. The new American fighters do not engage as we have learned to fight. They strike from above like hunting hawks. Fire their terrible guns with devastating accuracy. Climb away before we can react or pursue them. Our Zero is no longer the superior fighter. We are being systematically slaughtered by an enemy we cannot catch. We cannot escape their attacks once they begin. His report reached Admiral Yamamoto just weeks before the Admiral's own fatal encounter with American P-38 Lightning fighters. The Corsair's psychological impact exceeded even its impressive tactical success. Japanese pilots who had never experienced defeat began to feel genuine fear. The distinctive whistle of a diving Corsair triggered primitive terror responses. Ground crews at forward Japanese bases reported pilots refusing missions. When Corsair presence was confirmed over target areas, mysterious illnesses kept veteran pilots grounded. Some developed convenient mechanical problems that prevented takeoff. The mystique of Japanese air superiority had been carefully cultivated since Pearl Harbor. It evaporated completely under the heat of Corsair gun barrels. Moral authority had shifted to American pilots flying bent-wing birds. Summer 1943 saw Corsair roles expand beyond pure air to air combat. Marine pilots discovered their aircraft could carry significant bomb loads. First a single 500-pound bomb on the centerline rack. Then 1,000-pound bombs for major targets. The Corsair transformed into a fighter bomber capable of multiple roles. Fight through to targets, deliver ordnance with dive bomber precision, fight back home through enemy intercepts. Japanese positions that had been immune to fighter strafing now faced devastating bomb attacks. VMF 214, the famous Black Sheep Squadron under Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington, exemplified Corsair transformation of air combat. Boyington was already an experienced ace from his service with Flying Tigers in China. He understood both aircraft intimately, the Zero and the Corsair. His tactical innovations maximized Corsair advantages while completely negating Zero strengths. The Black Sheep were actually a collection of replacement pilots, misfits and troublemakers who did not fit with other squadrons. Boyington welded them into the most effective fighter squadron in the Solomon Islands theater. The squadron name came from their orphan status. Pilots without permanent squadron assignments who had been rejected elsewhere. Under Boyington's experienced leadership, they became efficient killers. In exactly 84 days of combat operations, VMF 214 destroyed 97 Japanese aircraft. They lost only 12 Corsairs in return, an 8-to-1 kill ratio that would have been pure fantasy just months earlier. They also destroyed 21 enemy vessels ranging from barges to destroyers, plus numerous ground installations and supply dumps. September 16, 1943, saw Boyington leading 24 Corsairs on a fighter sweep over Balal, a Japanese airfield at Bougainville's southern tip. Intelligence reports indicated a major buildup of enemy fighters at the facility. 50 Zero fighters intercepted them, rising like angry hornets from the Coral airstrip. In the previous year of war, such odds would have guaranteed suicide for American pilots. But Boyington had trained his pilots in energy management principles. Maintain speed and altitude advantage at all costs. Never surrender the initiative to enemy fighters. The battle developed in 3 dimensions simultaneously. Corsairs and Zeros climbed, dove, and turned in a deadly aerial ballet. But it was a ballet where one partner possessed all the advantages: superior speed, firepower, and protection versus maneuverability alone. The Black Sheep destroyed 20 Japanese fighters without losing a single Corsair. Boyington personally accounted for 5 enemy aircraft, becoming an ace in a single day. His tactics were simple, but devastatingly effective. Stay high above enemy formations. Maintain maximum airspeed at all times. Never give enemies predictable flight paths to target. He would dive from 25,000 feet, often attacking out of the sun. Fire a concentrated burst and be climbing back to altitude before Japanese pilots realized they were under attack. Technical reasons for Corsair dominance were complex and multifaceted. The R-2800 engine's tremendous power allowed sustained energy and vertical maneuvers that would stall Zeros completely. At high altitude, where air was thin, the supercharged Corsair engine maintained full power. Zero performance degraded significantly in the thin air above 15,000 feet. The Hamilton Standard propeller's efficiency provided superior acceleration and climb rate above 10,000 feet altitude, where most air combat occurred in the Pacific theater. The aircraft's robust construction included armor plating around cockpit areas, self-sealing fuel tanks that could absorb multiple hits, redundant control systems that functioned even with battle damage. It could absorb punishment that would completely destroy Zero fighters. Corsair armament was absolutely devastating against lightweight Japanese construction. 650 caliber machine guns converging at 300 yards could place 80 rounds per second on target. Armor-piercing incendiary ammunition could penetrate engine blocks with ease, ignite fuel tanks instantly, shred control surfaces into useless ribbons. Japanese pilots reported that Corsair fire struck like sledgehammers. Aircraft did not simply go down when hit. They disintegrated completely in mid-air under concentrated firepower. Technology wasn't the only factor determining aerial victories. America's industrial machine churned out more than just advanced aircraft. It manufactured pilots by the hundreds each month. Japan faced an impossible challenge replacing their mounting casualties. Meanwhile, American training facilities expanded at breakneck speed. The naval aviation training system had grown dramatically since pre-war days. What began as two primary installations had mushroomed into dozens of specialized facilities spanning the continent. Pensacola's primary training program worked alongside Corpus Christi's advanced courses. Jacksonville and Miami handled the complex operational preparations. San Diego and Hawaii provided final combat readiness instruction. Every American pilot reaching the combat zones arrived with substantial flying experience. 300 hours of logged flight time was standard. 50 of those hours were spent mastering their specific aircraft type. This preparation stood in stark contrast to Japanese replacement pilots. Enemy aviators often possessed less than 100 total flying hours. Some arrived at frontline squadrons with as few as 60 hours of experience. The Corsair's technological advantages meant that even mediocre American pilots could defeat seasoned Japanese veterans. The aircraft's forgiving flight characteristics protected novice pilots from fatal mistakes that would doom pilots flying less advanced fighters. Superior speed provided escape routes from dangerous situations. Heavy armor plating kept pilots alive when judgment errors occurred. Lieutenant Commander Minoru Genda represented Japan's finest tactical minds. He had helped architect the Pearl Harbor surprise attack. His strategic brilliance was acknowledged throughout the Japanese Navy. When he visited Rabaul during August 1943, his assessment carried tremendous weight. His conclusions were devastating for Japanese morale. The enemy's revolutionary fighter had transformed aerial warfare completely. Years of carefully developed tactics had become obsolete overnight. New aircraft designs were desperately needed. Training programs required complete overhaul. Everything demanded replacement or modernization. But time had run out for such massive changes. American forces were destroying Japanese aviation faster than adaptation could occur. His report recommended abandoning all offensive air operations immediately. Remaining experienced pilots should be conserved for homeland defense only. Tokyo's military leadership chose to ignore these warnings completely. The mathematics of aerial attrition painted a grim picture for Japan. The Solomon Islands campaign had begun with approximately 400 first-line Japanese pilots in the operational area. By August 1943, over 300 of these experienced aviators were dead. Their hastily trained replacements lacked both fundamental flying skills and combat experience. American pilot quality improved continuously throughout this period. Each returning combat veteran shared hard-won knowledge with incoming replacement pilots. Tactics proven effective in actual fighting were immediately incorporated into stateside training programs. The steep learning curve that had cost so many American lives during 1942 became a valuable teaching tool throughout 1943. The troublesome Corsair even inspired innovations in Allied air forces. British Fleet Air Arm pilots faced the aircraft's notorious carrier landing difficulties head-on. They developed revolutionary new approach techniques for aircraft carrier operations. The curved approach pattern kept the landing signal officer visible until the final moment. This innovation solved the Corsair's dangerous visibility problems during carrier approaches. Modifications to the tailwheel assembly reduced the violent bouncing that plagued early carrier trials. The oleo-pneumatic strut received softer dampening characteristics. Improved pilot training programs specifically addressed the Corsair's unique handling characteristics. Accident rates dropped dramatically as pilots mastered these demanding techniques. By late 1944, Corsairs operated successfully from American aircraft carriers throughout the Pacific. Their devastating firepower joined the fast carrier task forces that were systematically destroying Japanese naval power. The aircraft that had been rejected for carrier operations had become an indispensable part of naval aviation. VF-17 demonstrated the Corsairs' remarkable versatility beyond pure air-to-air combat roles. The Navy squadron, known as the Jolly Rogers, operated under Lieutenant Commander John "Tommy" Blackburn's aggressive leadership. Originally assigned to the aircraft carrier Bunker Hill, the squadron found itself land-based in the Solomon Islands due to Navy concerns about Corsair carrier operations. This assignment proved fortuitous for American air power development. Operating from fixed land bases allowed VF-17 to maximize the Corsair's superior range and heavy payload capabilities. Blackburn's pilots pioneered the use of Corsairs as effective fighter bombers. They experimented with mounting 1,000-pound bombs beneath the aircraft's centerline. Dive bombing techniques specific to the Corsair's characteristics emerged from these experiments. Pilots discovered that lowering the landing gear during dive attacks created effective speed breaks. The extended gear helped control diving speed while improving accuracy during bomb delivery runs. November 11, 1943, marked a pivotal demonstration during the massive assault on Rabaul. VF-17's Corsairs destroyed 18 Japanese aircraft in aerial combat. The same pilots then delivered their bombs accurately on designated targets. During the withdrawal phase, they shot down 5 additional enemy aircraft. This multi-role capability transformed the Corsair from defensive interceptor into offensive weapon system. The squadron's combat record achieved legendary status throughout naval aviation. During 76 days of intensive combat operations, the Jolly Rogers destroyed 152 Japanese aircraft. This averaged nearly 2 enemy aircraft destroyed per day of combat operations. Squadron leader Tommy Blackburn personally accounted for 11 confirmed aerial victories. More significantly for bomber crews, VF-17 never lost a single bomber they were assigned to escort. Their protective umbrella remained absolutely impenetrable to Japanese fighter attacks. Enemy pilots quickly learned that attacking American bombers meant confronting Corsairs. Facing Corsairs in combat meant probable death for most Japanese aviators. Individual pilots within VF-17 achieved extraordinary personal success records. Lieutenant Ira Kepford became the Navy's first Corsair ace pilot, eventually accumulating 17 confirmed aerial victories. His combat technique emphasized extremely close-range attacks before opening fire. Kepford would dive on enemy aircraft and hold his fire until he could clearly see the opposing pilot in his cockpit. Then he would unleash all 6 50-caliber machine guns in devastating point-blank bursts. This dangerous but effective technique required exceptional flying skill and nerves of steel. During one memorable mission, he destroyed 4 Japanese fighters within minutes. Each victory required less than 100 rounds of ammunition. The precision shooting demonstrated both the pilot's skill and the Corsair's devastating firepower when properly employed. The Japanese Navy's response revealed their growing desperation against American technological superiority. The improved Zero Model 52 incorporated numerous modifications intended to counter American advantages. Heavier armament included belt-fed 20mm cannons replacing the older drum-fed weapons. Better armor protection was added throughout the aircraft structure. A 55mm bulletproof glass windscreen protected the pilot from frontal attacks. Increased dive speed capability reached 460 miles per hour. These modifications represented significant improvements over earlier Zero variants. However, these enhancements added considerable weight to the aircraft. The Zero's legendary maneuverability suffered accordingly. The modifications failed to match the Corsair's raw power and performance advantages. This represented an engineering admission of defeat. Japan was attempting to fight the Corsair on American terms with inadequate industrial resources. The Japanese aviation industry also introduced entirely new aircraft types designed specifically to counter American fighters like the Corsair. The Kawanishi N1KJ George featured heavy armament, substantial armor protection, and impressive performance characteristics. In capable hands, it proved a formidable opponent for any American fighter. Unfortunately for Japan, the George arrived too late in the war to make any strategic difference. Production numbers remained far too small to equip frontline squadrons adequately. By the time significant numbers reached combat units, most of Japan's experienced pilots were already dead. Lieutenant Naoshi Kano represented Japan's most aggressive and successful fighter pilots. With over 30 confirmed aerial victories, he had developed specialized tactics specifically for engaging Corsairs in combat. His method involved approaching from directly below at maximum climb rate. Kano would fire one devastating burst at close range, then perform a stall maneuver to escape before the Corsair could respond effectively. On December 17, 1943, he successfully destroyed 2 Corsairs using this dangerous technique. When he attempted the maneuver a third time, Lieutenant Robert Hansen of VMF 215 was prepared. Understanding Kano's attack pattern, Hansen dove through his own formation to intercept the climbing Japanese ace. 6 50-caliber machine guns ended Kano's remarkable career in approximately 2 seconds. Even Japan's most skilled and experienced pilots could no longer compete successfully against well-flown Corsairs. The strategic isolation of Rabaul demonstrated the Corsair's decisive impact on Pacific War strategy. By November 1943, the once mighty Japanese fortress endured daily attacks from Corsair-escorted bomber formations. The complex's 5 major airfields lay in cratered ruins, completely unusable for aircraft operations. Simpson Harbor had become a graveyard filled with sunken Japanese ships. Over 100,000 Japanese troops remained stationed at Rabaul, but they were completely cut off from resupply or reinforcement. They were left to wither on the vine as the war's momentum shifted decisively toward American objectives. This strategic triumph was achieved without costly amphibious invasion operations. Air power alone, with the Corsair as its primary instrument, had neutralized Japan's most important forward base. The implications for future Pacific operations were enormous. By January 1944, American Corsairs completely dominated the skies over the Solomon Islands. Japanese daylight operations ceased entirely across the region. Enemy raids could only be conducted during nighttime hours or in weather conditions that grounded American fighters. The few remaining experienced Japanese pilots were withdrawn from forward positions to defend Japan's inner defensive perimeter. In their place stood inexperienced young pilots who could barely fly competently, much less engage in aerial combat effectively. They died in massive numbers, sometimes with entire formations wiped out, without achieving a single victory against American forces. Lieutenant Sadamu Kamachi numbered among the few surviving Japanese ace pilots in the region. His diary entries revealed the hopeless situation facing Japanese aviation. One entry described watching 12 Japanese fighters engage 8 American Corsairs in combat. Within minutes, 9 Japanese aircraft were falling in flames toward the ocean below. The 3 survivors fled the area immediately. Kamachi made no attempt to assist his comrades. He understood that one additional zero could accomplish nothing against such overwhelming American superiority. His assessment was brutally honest about Japan's situation. The aerial war was completely lost for Japanese forces. The pilots were already dead men walking. Their bodies simply hadn't realized this fact yet. The Corsairs' strategic impact extended far beyond simple victory statistics. Strategic bombing missions that had been impossible due to Japanese fighter interception now proceeded without interference. American ground forces advanced with continuous close air support from Corsair squadrons. Supply lines that previously required massive fighter escort now operated safely under Corsair umbrella protection from scattered island bases throughout the region. The aircraft's 1,000-mile range meant that nowhere in the Solomon Islands remained safe from American air power projection. Marine First Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh's combat actions epitomized the Corsairs' complete dominance over Japanese aviation. On August 15, 1943, facing odds of 6-1, Walsh repeatedly dove into a Japanese formation that was attacking American shipping. He destroyed 2 enemy dive bombers and 1 fighter aircraft, despite his Corsair being hit repeatedly by enemy fire. The aircraft's armor plating saved his life during this engagement. Post-flight inspection revealed over 50 bullet holes throughout his aircraft. None of these impacts penetrated to vital areas or flight controls. 2 weeks later, on August 30th, Walsh's engine failed during a bomber escort mission. He successfully landed at Munda Airfield, immediately jumped into another available Corsair, and took off to rejoin his flight formation. Encountering 50 Japanese Zero fighters alone over Kahili Airfield, Walsh attacked without hesitation, despite the overwhelming numerical disadvantage. In the resulting aerial melee, he shot down 4 enemy fighters before being shot down himself. He survived by successfully bailing out over the ocean. Hours spent floating in his life raft preceded rescue by an American flying boat. Walsh received the Medal of Honor for his extraordinary courage and returned to combat operations. By war's end, his victory total stood at 21 confirmed aerial kills. All victories were achieved while flying Corsairs against supposedly superior Japanese pilots and aircraft. The technological gap between American and Japanese fighters continued widening with each new Corsair variant reaching combat squadrons. The F4U incorporated a bubble canopy design for dramatically improved pilot visibility. This modification addressed one of the aircraft's few remaining weaknesses. The pilot's seat was raised 7 inches higher, further improving the aviator's view in all directions. The F4U mounted 4 20mm cannons instead of machine guns. Each cannon carried 120 rounds of high-explosive ammunition. The hitting power proved absolutely devastating against Japanese aircraft. A single burst could completely tear the wing off a Zero fighter. The F4U could carry 2,000-pound bombs or 8 5-inch rockets, in addition to its standard gun armament. Later variants could carry tiny TIM rockets, napalm tanks, or even aerial torpedoes for anti-shipping missions. Each improvement directly addressed lessons learned during actual combat operations. Modifications were incorporated within months of problem identification. When pilots complained about carbon monoxide seeping into cockpits, engineers completely redesigned the exhaust system. When the tailwheel strut proved too stiff for carrier landing operations, it received modification with softer oleo-pneumatic dampers. When pilots requested better radio equipment for improved communication, new radio sets were installed immediately. Japanese aircraft development, strangled by critical resource shortages and severe industrial limitations, could never match this rapid pace of continuous innovation. February 1944 marked exactly 1 year since the Corsair's combat debut in the Pacific Theater. During 12 months of intensive operations, Marine and Navy Corsair squadrons had destroyed over 600 Japanese aircraft in aerial combat. American losses to enemy action numbered fewer than 80 Corsairs during the same period. The 11-to-1 kill ratio represented more than simple tactical superiority. This was strategic revolution in aerial warfare. Air superiority, once Japan's greatest military advantage, had become America's absolute guarantee of victory in any engagement. The statistical evidence was staggering beyond belief. Corsair squadrons were achieving extraordinary kill ratios in engagement after engagement across the Pacific. Individual pilots were becoming ace pilots during single combat missions. Entire Japanese formations were being completely annihilated without inflicting any casualties on their American attackers. This wasn't aerial combat in any traditional sense. This was systematic execution of Japanese aviation. Both Japanese and American military leadership understood these implications perfectly. Everyone knew what these kill ratios meant for the war's ultimate outcome. Captain Minoru Genda, the architect of Pearl Harbor and Japan's foremost aerial strategist, assessed the situation with characteristic brutal honesty in his report to the Naval General Staff. The Corsair had made Japan's entire naval aviation doctrine completely obsolete overnight. Japanese forces had trained for 20 years to fight a war that no longer existed in reality. The Americans had changed all the rules of engagement. They had built superior aircraft and trained better pilots. Japan could never catch up to American advantages. Japanese pilots could only die with honor intact. Nothing else remained possible. The human cost of this aerial revolution was staggering for Japanese aviation. Japan lost approximately 2,000 naval aviators during the Solomon Islands campaign alone. The vast majority fell victim to Corsair attacks. These weren't merely pilots flying combat missions. These casualties included irreplaceable flight instructors, experienced squadron commanders, and innovative tactical developers. This represented irreplaceable expertise accumulated over decades of careful development. The pre-war Japanese Navy had required 3 full years to train a single carrier-qualified pilot. By 1944, they were sending teenage boys to combat with less than 6 months of basic training. The results were predictable and utterly tragic for these young men. American losses, while certainly significant in human terms, remained strategically sustainable for continued operations. Industrial production was delivering new Corsairs faster than combat operations could consume them. By 1944, Vought was producing 300 Corsairs monthly. That represented 1 completed aircraft every 82 minutes around the clock. Goodyear and Brewster added their licensed production capacity as FG and F3A variants, respectively. Pilot training programs had expanded exponentially since Pearl Harbor, providing qualified replacements who arrived in combat theaters better prepared than their predecessors. Each new generation of Corsair pilots proved more lethal than the previous group. This represented compound interest in combat experience and institutional knowledge. The Corsair's psychological warfare value matched its devastating physical destructiveness perfectly. Tokyo Rose, the English-language propaganda broadcaster, acknowledged the aircraft's terrifying impact in her nightly radio transmissions. She warned American pilots that the whistling death brought death to those who flew it, as well as their enemies. But her threats rang completely hollow to experienced combat pilots. Japanese pilots knew the brutal truth about aerial combat. When Corsairs appeared on the horizon, survival meant running away immediately. Even successful escape wasn't guaranteed against the Corsair's superior speed and climbing ability. Major Gregory "Pappy" Boyington's final combat mission illustrated both the Corsair's immense power and its operational limits. On January 3, 1944, leading a fighter sweep over Rabaul, Boyington shot down his 26th and 27th confirmed victories. His Corsair was hit by intense ground fire and attacking enemy fighters. The aircraft finally succumbed to cumulative battle damage from multiple sources. Boyington survived the crash, but was immediately captured by Japanese forces. He spent the remainder of the war in harsh Japanese prison camps. His personal loss demonstrated that even in superior aircraft, aerial warfare remained extremely dangerous for individual pilots. However, his squadron's continued success, without their famous leader, proved that the Corsairs' advantages transcended individual pilot skill. The Black Sheep Squadron shot down 94 additional Japanese aircraft after losing Boyington. This proved that the Corsairs' technological advantage could turn average pilots into effective killers and transform good pilots into legendary aces. The aircraft itself had become the ace maker. Strategic implications from Corsair dominance rippled across the entire Pacific War theater. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto's death in April 1943, shot down by P-38 Lightnings made possible by Corsair suppression of Japanese fighter opposition, eliminated Japan's most capable naval strategist. The isolation and systematic reduction of Rabaul, achieved through Corsair air superiority, removed Japan's most important forward base without requiring costly amphibious invasion operations. The Marine Island hopping campaign accelerated dramatically, with each landing operation supported by Corsair squadrons that guaranteed American ground forces would never again fight without complete air cover overhead. The Philippines campaign of 1944 saw Corsairs operating effectively from both land bases and aircraft carriers. By that time, the initial carrier landing problems had been completely solved through improved pilot training combined with aircraft modifications. Marine squadrons, VMF-124 and VMF-213, operated from the USS Essex, providing both fleet air defense and close ground support missions. Their presence over Leyte Gulf helped ensure American victory in history's largest naval engagement. The Corsair even revolutionized carrier operations doctrine completely. Initially rejected for carrier operations due to landing difficulties, British Royal Navy pilots developed innovative techniques to safely land the challenging aircraft on flight decks. The curved approach pattern they pioneered became standard procedure for all carrier aircraft operations. Their operational success convinced the U.S. Navy to reconsider their earlier decision. By late 1944, Corsairs were operating routinely from American aircraft carriers throughout the Pacific. By war's end, Corsairs operated from dozens of different carriers, extending their deadly reach across the entire Pacific Ocean. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai, Japan's most famous surviving ace pilot, encountered Corsairs over Iwo Jima during June 1944. Despite his vast combat experience totaling over 60 confirmed aerial victories, he barely survived the engagement. His Zero was completely riddled with 50-caliber bullet holes. His cockpit filled with smoke from damaged systems. Only exceptional flying skill and considerable luck allowed him to escape destruction. His brutally honest assessment captured the hopeless situation facing Japanese pilots. Fighting Corsairs while flying a Zero was equivalent to fighting a modern tank, while armed only with a cavalry sword. Such combat might be considered brave, but it was ultimately stupid and inevitably fatal for the Japanese pilot involved. The Marianas Campaign of June 1944 demonstrated the Corsairs' complete maturity as an integrated weapon system. During the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot on June 19th, although the Hellcat served as the primary Navy carrier fighter, Marine Corsair squadrons operating from newly captured island bases contributed significantly to the aerial slaughter. Japanese naval aviation lost over 400 aircraft during a single day of combat. Most fell victim to American fighters in lopsided engagements. The kill ratios were so completely one-sided that American pilots actually felt guilty about the systematic slaughter they were conducting. This wasn't aerial combat by any reasonable definition. This was organized target practice against helpless opponents. The complete statistical record told the entire story of Corsair dominance. By August 1945, Corsairs had destroyed 2,140 Japanese aircraft in air-to-air combat throughout the Pacific War. They had dropped 15,621 tons of bombs during ground attack missions. This represented 70% of all bombs delivered by U.S. Navy and Marine fighter aircraft during the Pacific War. Over 400 Japanese ships had been sunk or seriously damaged by direct Corsair attacks. The aircraft that initially couldn't operate from aircraft carriers had become the most successful naval fighter in aviation history. Production continued until 1953, with 12,571 total Corsairs manufactured. This represented the longest production run of any World War II fighter aircraft design. At Okinawa, Corsairs proved absolutely invaluable in defeating massive kamikaze attacks against the American fleet. Their superior speed allowed interception of suicide aircraft before they could reach their intended targets. Their devastating firepower ensured that kamikazes, once hit by Corsair guns, were completely destroyed rather than merely damaged, but still capable of completing their deadly missions. Marine pilots called this duty turkey shooting, but it represented deadly serious business for fleet protection. A single kamikaze penetrating the defensive screen could sink a destroyer or severely damage an aircraft carrier. However, statistics alone couldn't capture the complete human dimension of this aerial warfare. Each destroyed Zero, Oscar, or Betty represented someone's son, husband, or father dying violently. The gradual realization among surviving Japanese aviators that they faced not merely defeat but complete annihilation created a fatalistic atmosphere throughout their ranks. Kamikaze tactics, born from complete desperation, represented the final acknowledgement that conventional air combat against Corsairs had become suicide without any meaningful purpose. Young Ensign Takeo Yamamoto arrived at Rabaul during March 1944 with just 90 hours of total flight time logged. He survived exactly one encounter with American Corsairs before being killed. His diary, recovered after the war, contained only a single entry about combat operations. He had seen the bent-wing Devils in action. 3 members of his training class were dead after their first mission. He had run away from the fight. He felt ashamed, but remained alive. Tomorrow, he would probably join his dead classmates. The Americans weren't fighting fairly by any reasonable standard. They were simply executing Japanese pilots systematically. The Corsairs' legacy extended far beyond World War II operations. During the Korean War, Corsairs flew 80% of all U.S. Navy and Marine close air support missions. The F4U-5 variant, powered by a 2,300 horsepower engine, could carry 4,000 pounds of ordnance on external pylons. Lieutenant Guy Bourdillon became the Navy's only ace pilot in Korea, flying a Corsair night fighter variant, shooting down 5 North Korean aircraft. French Navy Corsairs fought extensively in Indochina, providing close air support for Foreign Legion troops at Dien Bien Phu and other besieged outposts. The aircraft remained in active production until 1953, serving with numerous air forces worldwide well into the jet age. The Corsair even made a final combat appearance during 1969 in the soccer war between Honduras and El Salvador. Both sides operated Corsairs in combat, making this the last piston-engine fighter combat in aviation history. Captain Fernando Soto of the Honduran Air Force shot down 3 Salvadoran aircraft, including 2 Corsairs, possibly making him the last piston-engine fighter ace in history. This represented a fitting conclusion for an aircraft that had revolutionized aerial combat completely. Admiral John S. McCain Sr., surveying the air war's progression, noted that the Corsair hadn't simply defeated Japanese air power. It had completely obliterated Japanese aviation as an effective fighting force. American forces had progressed from struggling for basic survival to achieving absolute aerial dominance within 18 months of the Corsairs' combat introduction. No single aircraft design had ever changed the fundamental character of warfare so completely in such a brief period. Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the Pacific Fleet, provided an even more direct assessment. The Corsair had provided air superiority wherever and whenever American forces needed it. Without the Corsair's decisive impact, the island-hopping campaign would have been completely impossible to execute successfully. The aircraft had served as the key that unlocked Japanese defensive positions across the entire Pacific theater. Final testimony came from an unexpected source entirely. Emperor Hirohito, in his post-war memoir, identified 3 factors that had made Japan's defeat completely inevitable. These were American industrial capacity, the atomic bomb, and the Corsair fighter aircraft. When Japanese pilots could no longer contest control of the skies, he wrote, the Empire's island fortresses became completely indefensible. The Corsair had served as the sword that severed the Empire's vital lifelines completely. Japanese ace Saburo Sakai, who survived the war with 64 confirmed victories, provided perhaps the most eloquent final assessment of the Corsair's impact. The Zero had been like a rapier, light, agile, and deadly when wielded by skilled hands. The Corsair was like a broadsword, heavy, powerful, and capable of crushing everything in its path. In the hands of a samurai warrior, the rapier might be considered superior, but the Americans possessed 10 broadswords for every rapier Japan could field. American pilots didn't need to be samurai warriors to use their weapons effectively. On a humid morning in September 1945, as American occupation forces landed in Japan, a formation of Marine Corsairs flew overhead in review. Their distinctive bent wings cast shadows over Tokyo Bay, where just 2 years earlier, Japanese pilots had been supreme masters of the Pacific skies. The war was finally over, but the symbolic message was unmistakably clear. The age of the samurai of the sky had ended forever. The age of American air power, born in the crucible of the Solomon Islands and forged in the Corsair's engine, had begun. The last Japanese ace to face Corsairs in actual combat, Lieutenant Kanayoshi Muto, survived the war with 18 confirmed victories. Asked years later about fighting against the American fighter, he smiled sadly. You want to know about fighting Corsairs? Here is the absolute truth. You didn't fight Corsairs in any meaningful sense. You survived encounters with them, if you were very lucky and very fast in running away. Most Japanese pilots were neither lucky nor fast enough. The bent-wing bird was death itself given physical form. Death always wins in the end, without exception. Physical evidence of the Corsair's complete dominance lies scattered across Pacific islands from Guadalcanal to Okinawa. The aluminum skeletons of crashed aircraft continue telling their stories to researchers, but the ratio remains telling after all these decades. For every crashed Corsair discovered, researchers find 10 or more Japanese aircraft wreckage sites. Some were shot down during aerial combat. Others were destroyed on the ground by bombing and strafing attacks. Many were simply abandoned when their pilots were killed, and no replacement aviators existed to fly them. Marine Corps archives contain thousands of gun camera footage reels, each showing the final moments of Japanese aircraft under attack. The films are remarkably similar in their deadly content. A Zero, or Oscar, or Betty fills the gun sight completely. Bright flashes appear as 50 caliber rounds impact the target. Pieces fly off in all directions. Fire erupts from fuel tanks and engine compartments. The enemy aircraft tumbles out of frame toward the ocean below. What these films cannot show is the complete human cost. Young men, both Japanese and American, died in those aluminum coffins falling from Pacific skies. In the depths of the Pacific Ocean, scattered across thousands of miles of ocean floor, rest the aluminum bones of fallen aircraft from both sides. Zeros and Corsairs alike bear silent witness to the air war's savage intensity and enormous human cost. But even underwater, the ratio tells the tale of technological supremacy. For every Corsair resting on the ocean floor, 11 Japanese aircraft rest beside it in the eternal darkness. The calculus of aerial victory, written in twisted metal and measured in young lives lost, proved that when superior technology, intensive training, and massive industrial capacity converge effectively, the result transcends battle. It becomes systematic execution of enemy forces. The Corsair hadn't simply won an air war against determined opponents. It had revolutionized the fundamental nature of aerial combat forever, proving that superior technology properly employed could overcome any advantages in individual skill or combat experience. The age of the individual warrior ace was ending throughout military aviation. The age of systematic technological air supremacy had arrived, painted dark blue with distinctive inverted gull wings, and announced by whistling death from above.